G'day and welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do another one of my info videos. This is another one on bullets or on projectiles, but this one's actually about terms. Some terms that are used where I think only a small part of the industry really know what they're talking about. A fair few, it's turning into a little bit of terms that are about bullets, but there's a little bit more to it. But this is just to help people understand whether it's relevant to you or not. Most of us just would go and buy good bullets, ones that have shot well, some ones that are accurate. You tend to pay a little bit more money for better ones that do a little better job. But really this is about terms and what's used in the industry, some in advertising, some in the way of big words make me seem smarter, some in, a various level of things. And this is just to help educate our community and make it a little bit more understandable. And the terms I want to discuss are ogive, tangent, secant and hybrid. These are all words that are used in the industry. A tangent ogive projectile or a secant ogive or a hybrid. Like I said, they're used in different fashions, but I just want to explain what those words actually mean and put them into context with projectiles so we all become a little wiser. Okay, so let's start off on that. To start off with, the ogive of a bullet. A lot of people think that is talking about one particular spot on a bullet. It is where the lands meet the bullet. That's the ogive. That's how it's being used. All that sort of descriptions, various things. Well, to start off with, a bullet, yes, it has different parts. There is the base, the tail, the bearing surface, or it can be called the shank, the sides of the bullet, wherever it is, the straight bit, the bearing surface. Then we have the ogive, which is actually, yes, up here. And we have the me-plat, which is the tip on the front. Let's come back to that ogive bit there, which, yes, you've seen I've drawn the whole front of the bullet. Well, what's ogive mean? Ogive is actually an engineering term. It's a term to describe the front of a two-dimensional or three-dimensional drawing or thing, but it's the front curved section. So it's got a curve. It's actually described in the fact that it's curved down, be that rounded, be that tapered. That's basically the front of that object. And yes, if we look on a bullet, that is the front of the bullet we're talking about there. So that is what ogive means. It means that it is the front, for our instances, it is in front of the bearing surface and just prior to the tip, it is the front of the bullet. That is the ogive. So let's get into those other descriptions. We've got secant, and you'll hear people say secant ogives, or just secant or secant radius. You'll see tangent, and you'll see, and all the same references, and you'll see hybrid. People talk about hybrid. These are all talking about different bullets, and it's used in different ways, but what do they mean? Well, to start off with, let's go with tangent, because it's the easy one to start from. Here is where the tangent actually comes from. Tangent is the intersection, and you'll hear it in other words, in other ways when you're talking about going off on a tangent. It's actually an intersection between a straight line and a circle. That is the tangent intersection. Now, if we look into a bullet design, when you go through and draw and this is ways to describe how that bullet is drawn, if it's probably the easiest way to describe it, but you'll see that a tangent ogive, so the tangent shape to the front of the bullet, means that in a sense, you've drawn a line down from the end of the bearing surface and then taken a radius or an arc out from there. And that gives you a tangent style ogive. What that means, the advantage of a tangent style ogive is that engages with the lands, so your rifling engages really nicely because that curve comes straight back to that bearing surface. So it means that it really does intersect and draw it straight in an engineering sense, in a drawing sense, and also in a practical sense. It means it engages with the lands very easily. Makes it more capable, easier to set up, not so fussy on its land depth for how it feeds and that sort of stuff, or on the actual bullet jump, that sort of stuff. It fits in not easier because it's made with this very accepting tangent drawn radius to the ogive on the projectile. Secant. Secant is another actual word for an intersection of a straight line to a circle. When you cut a line through a circle, so it ends up with a sharp corner between the radius that you're dealing with and the straight line, or the circle you're dealing with and the straight line. That sharp corner there is called a secant intersection. Now, secant, when you look at a bullet design, you'll realise that what actually happens is rather than drawing your radius point for your ogive straight down from the bearing surface, you come back behind the bearing surface. Doesn't matter how far behind in calling it a secant radius or a secant ogive, but the moment it's not lined up, then it cuts across and you end up with a little sharp line up there. Now, that'll be blended in, sometimes it's not, sometimes it is, but that means that front ogive, the main section of your ogive radius, or that curve there, is actually a secant radius. What that tends to cause, and the reason it's designed, is that it'll shallow out that radius, and that will make it so it's pointier, I suppose, longer and pointier, and that slips through the air better. That deals with the air better. So you'll get a higher ballistic coefficient out of doing that. But in the early days of the VLDs, having this secant radius, what that caused is they were much fussier about how they accepted to the lands. Now, they wouldn't tend to have that sharp line that you could see. They'll just blend it across a bit so it looked a little bit smoother. But because of that, they ended up with a far fussier, and you had to do a lot more work in setting up your seating depth and your bullet jump to make them shoot properly. Some would always be fussy, but that was a hard point because of that. And that is because of that secant radius to give a better ballistic coefficient and create the very low drag or the ultra low drag, or all the different words they had for them, but they were using secant radiuses. So we come to the last one in this little description, and that's the hybrid. Hybrid's actually very simple. Hybrid is joining the two together. Having a secant radius for the majority, or a secant ogive for the majority of the projectile, so it got all those efficiencies, and then that last little piece as it comes on the lands, they had a tangent radius. So the hybrid is just talking about mixing a couple of things together, as a hybrid would be in anything. When you have a hybrid plant, when you have a hybrid animal, you have hybrid anything, it's talking about mixing the two together. And what we're talking about there is like I said, you have a secant radius to give you efficiencies of going through the air, and then you have a hybrid to get it to move into the lands properly. So the two styles of radius join together to create a hybrid projectile. Now, that's the basics of the words. The truth of it is, it isn't quite as simple as that. These are simply descriptions of how to draw it, of when they're designing it, to draw it. And some companies will go exactly that, they're going to draw it that way, but of course you can push the boundaries around. You can have more shapes inside there where you don't have to draw or design a bullet out of the radius of a protractor. You can go through the process of actually shaping it beyond that point and put different radiuses in there. But this is what people have done over the years, and this is how they describe it, and that's what those words are about. So ultimately, I'll come back to where I started. In the way of what suits you, what's better for you, there is a tangent style is easier to feed. They tend to be not quite as efficient going through the air, so not quite as high a ballistic coefficient, but are very easy to load and feed. So hunting projectiles and that sort of stuff tend to use them, but they are not very fussy in the way of how you use them in the rifle. Your secants, your VLDs, that sort of stuff, more about pushing the maximum ballistic coefficients and can be fussy in how they're set up. And the new age of hybrid is just pretty common sense, putting the two together. But ultimately, for you, what suits you, hey, you go with a projectile that's being sold, it works well in your rifle, that's all you need to go with. I tend to find that the more you spend on a projectile, to a degree, they tend to be better quality. And this is simply to do with their quality control of how they build them, to do with the numbers they do with the machines they do with them, to do with how often they change out the mandrels and bits and pieces to keep them more consistent. So the likes of a Burger, which I use a lot of, they tend to be more expensive, they're a little bit harder to get because they take more to make, because they can't run as many through their factories as the way they do things. Lots of details I've been through before, but that's why they cost a little more, but they tend to be a little bit more consistent. And there's other companies that are in the same place, and then there's on the other side of the fence. I'm not going to go into names, but they tend to have a higher throughput. They tend to not be changing out the mandrels and bits and pieces so often because it's more about numbers. slightly less consistency, still can be some very good bullets, but they cost less, so they tend to be not quite as consistent. What suits you? I suppose it depends on your budget, on what you're trying to get done, on how much accuracy matters to you. But this conversation is just to make a little bit of that what seemingly is complicated or a confusing science makes sense. What we're actually using is engineering terms to describe what that basics of the bullet shape is, and it's going away from the VLDs, going into a Secant, or like I said, the hybrids, that sort of stuff. All makes sense in simple engineering terms, and this is a video to try and help you with that. Anyway guys, I hope that made some sense in some form or other. Hope you liked. Thanks for checking in, and we'll catch you next time.